Hello, this is Angelia, and you are listening to or watching the podcast, Why You Do, What You Do. The podcast that talks about human development psychology to try and maybe help you figure out a little bit more about why you do what you do. And last time we were talking about family structure, and we're going to start talking about adoptive families now. Some of my friends are adopted. I know people who have adopted, children that were other family members or friends, and you know, it's a common thing nowadays. Adoption is found in all cultures throughout history. It is not only for infertile people, single people, older people, gay and lesbian couples, and people who already have biological children have become adoptive parents. So people from all walks of life, have become adoptive parents. And I think it's a good thing because there are so many children who are given up for adoption for one reason or another that don't get homes. They're aged out of the system. And some of them are more well adjusted than others. So I think if you can adopt, if the situation in your home is, a good one and you have the financial ability to adopt, then you should, because you can help a child's life be so much better by doing that. Adoptions take place through public or private agencies or through independent agencies. Excuse me. And agreements between birth parents and adoptive parents. And there's some fear surrounding that in private adoptions. There have been cases where the birth mother decides she changed her mind, and then the adoptive couple gets disappointed because they were ready for this child, and then they don't get to have the child. Independent adoptions have become increasingly common. And, that's because there are a lot of hoops to jump through sometimes with adoption agencies and, orphanages. They don't really call them that anymore. But it gets to be a thing where, you're judged more harshly than you need be sometimes. But now looking into people is important, we tried to adopt a dog one time from a certain agency, and from what I used to work with another agency who worked with children who needed to be represented and adopted and things. Excuse me. And there were more stringent questions and priorities on getting this dog than there were on getting a child. So, the system is not perfect. About 60% of legal adoptions in the United States are by relatives, usually step-parents or grandparents. And I know a lot of grandparents that are raising their grandchildren for one reason or another. Usually it has to do with criminal activity or drugs. A lot of grandparents have to step up because the parents just aren't. An increasing percentage of children available for adoption by non-relatives are beyond infancy, are of foreign birth, or have special needs. And a lot of these children, like I said, don't get out of the system. You see a lot of famous people adopting these little foreign babies, and, rich people, and, this is kind of they're showing off their little foreign baby. And they might really love the kid. I'm not going to say they don't, but, it became a trend there for a while. And special needs children, it takes a special person to adopt a special child. So, anyone who is adopting special needs children and taking care of them, I think you're great. I think you're like the greatest person ever. And, if you have the capability to do that, then I encourage you to do that because chances are you might be the only one who's willing to. This is because advances in contraception and legalization of abortion have reduced the number of adoptable healthy white U.S. babies. The percentage of babies born to never married white women who were placed for adoption dropped from 19.3% to only 1.7%. Now, some people think that's a problem, but knowing there are so many children who never get adopted, terminating an unwanted pregnancy is a good thing sometimes. If that child is going to be, horribly disabled, if that child is a product of rape or incest, to where I know people who were raped or were molested, by family members and raped, and were forced by their parents because of religious reasons to have this child. One of them grew up, became seriously mentally ill, and ended up in an institution. The other one killed this child later on. So, well-meaning people, it might be your religious belief that you should never terminate a child. But in reality, you need to think about, was this child meant to be? Is this child a product of love and a gift from God? Or is this child a biological product of the rapist and the devil who incited this rapist to rape? You got to think about that. Everyone has free will. And, animals make babies all the time. Black women have consistently been far less likely to put up their babies for adoption. And that's because that's their social belief system. And there are some people I've met who I think the child should have been put up for adoption because the abuse they took in their home was so bad. It probably would have been better off if someone had adopted the child, because they were clearly unwanted and unloved, and they went through hell at home. And why? Why do that to your child? About 8% of adoptions are transracial, often involving an Asian or Latin American child being adopted into a household with a white mother. And I know people who have done that. I have cousins who have done that. And I think that's great. Like I said, if you want to adopt and bring a family, I'm all for it. Do it. Make that child's life better. The resulting families are among the far greater and increasing number of multiracial U.S. families. About 1.4 million of them in 95 formed by interracial marriage. And that's a reality. There are some people who are not down with that, but, whatever, who cares what you think? I'm a product of, a lot of different races who came together. So, I don't care what you think, for sure. Rules governing interracial adoptions vary from state to state. Some give priority to same-race adoption, whereas others require that race not be a factor in approval of adoption. And I believe that. I mean, there are arguments, and one of the big ones I heard, I guess is about 20 years ago, was that black children should go to black families. Well, there are not enough black families wanting to adopt all the black children who are in the system. That's just a fact of life. So I personally think, adopt the child that you want, go meet the children, find which one clicks with you. It don't matter what color they are on the outside. It's the person on the inside that matters. Adopting a child carries special challenges. Besides the usual issues of parenthood, adoptive parents need to deal with integrating the adopted child into the family, explaining the adoption to the child, helping the child develop a healthy sense of self, and perhaps eventually helping the child to contact the biological parents. And some adoptive parents are so scared of that, that they'll get to know the biologicals and leave us, and it's not going to be the case, because they're more interested in the person who cared about them enough to raise them than they are about the person who actually gave birth to them. They are curious. They want to know about it. In some cases, the child doesn't. I heard when it was discussed about finding out whether a person was their biological, or not, and they said, I don't care. The person who raised me is my parent. I don't care about this other person. They didn't want me, so basically on them. And that's the way it happens sometimes. You got to think about these things. Stuff's going to happen. There are few significant differences in adjustment between adopted and non-adopted children, according to a review of the literature. Children, turn my page here, adopted in infancy are less likely to have adjustment problems, and that's because they're adopted in infancy and they don't really remember, who was mom before or dad before. They know who got them now. Any problems that do occur seem to surface around the time of sexual maturation. And that's when problems surface for everybody. When we get into our teens and those hormones are raging and the emotions are more than we can handle. One study looked at 100 Israeli families, half of whom had adopted South American children and half Israeli children. The two groups of 7 to 13-year-olds, all of whom had been adopted soon after birth, showed no significant differences in psychological adjustment. Excuse me. So, it's not necessarily a factor if the home is a good place, an environment that's, constructive for the child. In school, adjustment and performance in observed behavior at home or in the way they coped with being adopted, the children did not differ. So, like I said, if you come from a good home, it doesn't matter if you're adopted, if you're a natural child, if you're the next door kid that, the parents took off and left him and you just take the kid into your home and adopt him, it doesn't matter. Traditionally, adoptions were confidential with no contact between the birth mother and the adoptive parents. And the identity of the birth mother was kept secret. And those days are gone. They can have an option, but then again, the child can track stuff down and find out later on. So, in recent years, open adoption, in which the parties share information or have direct contact, has become more common. And that's because increasingly the stigma is being lost in being an unwed mother, teen mother, or whatever. And more and more mothers want to be involved in the child's life as a, auntie, a visitor that comes every now and then or on holidays or whatever. But they realize they, at that point in time, are not capable of providing that child with the life that is going to be constructive and happy for that child. So they're giving the child up for adoption on the, hope that they can stay involved in the child's life. And if the adoptive parents are okay with this and understand this, then, like I said, they can be there for the milestones in the kid's life, and, it's good for everybody. Contrary to what are sometimes considered the risks of open adoption, one study found that with direct contact, the adoptive parents tend to feel more confident that the arrangement is permanent and that the birth mother will not try to reclaim the child, because they have contact with her and they know what she's thinking and they know what's going on. And like I said, most young unwed mothers who give up their children know they cannot provide the life for this child that more mature, more financially well-off couple could. So, these parents are more willing to communicate with the birth mother if they understand that she knows this and that she's not going to try and claim the kid again, later on down the road. At the same time, they are more likely to recognize the child's interest in knowing about his or her origins, because at some point we all become curious, I've been involved in doing my own genealogy and I did DNA testing, found out some interesting things. So all of us at some point want to know, where did we come from? We know where we came from, but we need to know what's in our DNA. Where did my people come from? Where do they start? Excuse me. And I think that's just a common thread in everybody's life. At some point, you're going to ask that question. In one survey of 1,059 California families who had adopted children 3 years earlier, whether or not an adoption was open seemed to bear no relation to the children's adjustment or to the parents' satisfaction with the adoption, both of which were very high. So, like I said, if you have a good, constructive, happy home, that stuff doesn't really matter. The annual number of divorces has tripled since 1960. 1/3 of first marriages dissolve within 10 years, and more than 1 million children are involved in divorces each year. And that's a shame. Marriage is not what it used to be. It's too easy to get out of. There's so many divorces. But sometimes that's a necessary thing. When I was studying psychology, and what age is a good age to get married, we'll probably get into that later on. Marriage shock. They recommend 30 years old. 30 years old is the perfect age to get married. And then have your children between 30 and 35. That's when you have the most patience and the most, calmness, that age, to help, raise a toddler age child. And then, of course, from age 35 on, the risks of birth defects go up. So according to the studies, from the age of 30 to 35 is the perfect time to be having those little people. So, if you wait and do it that way, when your 20s are supposed to be when you're getting your stuff figured out, when you're building a foundation for your life, so that by the time you hit 30, you can start bringing other people into the world and providing a foundation for them. If you start too early and you don't have a foundation under you, then you're shaky, and that child's life is going to be shaky. That's when a lot of divorces happen. And you're just not giving your child the best start. So I agree with the professionals on that one. Get married at age 30 and start having those little people between, 31 and 35, and, have a strong foundation under you and a strong foundation for that family that you're building. Influences on a child's adjustment to divorce include the child's age or maturity, gender, temperament, and psychological and social adjustment before the divorce. So the divorce itself might not send the kid off in a bad direction, but the child's own temperament and socialization and the way they've come up, plus the divorce, can have a cumulative effect that kind of sends them in a bad direction. The ways parents handle such issues is custody and visitation arrangements, finances, reorganization of household duties, contact with the non-custodial parent, remarriage, and the child's relationship with a step-parent also make a difference. Because, like I say, children learn where they live. Every little thing affects a child in every little way. My father and mother got divorced when I was young, and he sometimes missed visitations. And so, my brother and mom would kind of bet he was coming, and they bet a candy bar. But he had remarried, and the woman did not like us. She did not like his kids. She put her kids first. Her kids were allowed to have, treats that we were not allowed to have. And when we complained to him when he got home from work, she said, well, I didn't know if the mother would allow that, and I'm not going to have her coming at me over that. And so it was not a good situation whenever we went to visit. So the visitation stopped. He brought them to our place a couple of times, and with similar results in our house. So these two women were not willing to work with each other on, having good relationships for the whole family. My mother wanted him and her kids to be the only ones. This other woman wanted him and her kids to be the only ones. And of course, so there was an impasse there where the two families really could not deal with each other because the two mothers were absolutely not. No. So, that didn't work out too well. Now, I have gotten to know her a little bit, my half-sister since then, and she's a decent person, and I like her. And now I had a stepsister who never did decide to like me. I said something to her when I think I was 9, I guess, that she didn't care for. And she held a grudge against me all her life for that, and that was a shame, but, kids say stuff, especially if it comes to their brain, they'll say it. So younger children are more anxious about divorce, have less realistic perceptions of what caused it, and are more likely to blame themselves. But they may adapt more quickly than older children who better understand what is going on. So the little kids, they're not as savvy as the older kids. They might not notice little cues, little fights and things like that. So to them, it might just kind of happen, and they're like, oh, they don't understand. And of course, little kids are more likely to blame themselves and say, if I'd have been a good kid, maybe they wouldn't have gotten divorced. And, some of that kind of I've heard, but it's never the kid's fault. It's the parents' fault. They fight, that's just life. People fight and shit happens. Excuse my language. Excuse me, my gosh. But little kids kind of move on quicker. Because older kids, they're in their head and they're thinking more about this stuff. And it bothers them more because they might feel like one parent was particularly unfair to the other parent. And they might be angry at one parent for being abusive or neglectful or whatever. So they may be holding that on. And it can affect them more mentally and emotionally than it can a younger child because they understand more about what's going on. School-age children are sensitive to parental pressures and loyalty conflicts because there are parents who, they're nasty when they get divorced and they want you to be loyal to them, that you might have to go to this person's house, but I'm the one who loves you and takes care of you. And I've seen that happen, and it's just wrong. It's a dirty politics, and there's no reason for it. And all you're doing, you're not punishing the other ex-spouse, you're hurting your children because you're putting them in the middle of something that a child should not be in the middle of. Like younger children, they may fear abandonment and rejection, especially if they love the other parent and they're kind of agreeing with the other parent, but they feel like if you agree with the other parent, then that parent is going to be mad at you and not want to see you anymore or something like that. People sometimes put their children in the middle of things where the children should not be in the middle of anything. And if you have done that to your children, you need to make amends on that one because your child loves you both. It doesn't matter. They love you both. And you don't put a child in the middle of divorce conflict. And if you do, you're a garbage human being. Facts of life. Boys generally find it harder to adjust than girls do. Again, with the boys and the slower processing. Sorry, guys. However, this difference may be less significant than was once thought, and may depend largely on how involved the father remains. Because boys, they imprint on dad. Dad is the man. Even if dad was not a good dad, they still want that relationship with dad. In most divorce cases, the mother gets custody, but paternal custody is a growing trend. And generally that's because they know the mother is going to be more nurturing, more loving, and take care of the child better. Now, certainly that's not the truth in all cases, but in general, women are more nurturing, more loving and giving, and so that's why they feel like with the mother is a better place for a child. I mean, if you look out in nature, in a lot of cases, the father, deals with getting the pregnant, and then the father leaves, and then the mother animal raises the children all by herself. So out in nature, sometimes fathers don't even really come into play except for inseminating the mother. The more recent the separation, the closer the father lives to his children, and the higher his socioeconomic status, the more involved he is likely to be. So, if he's a father who's got some money, if he lives close by, and, he has an interest in his children, he's more likely to get involved than a depressed father who's not having any money and just, doesn't feel like he has anything to add to the child's life. Children adjust better when the custodial parent creates a stable, structured, nurturing environment and does not expect the children to take on more responsibility than they are ready for. So as the parent, it's your job to provide that steady, stable, structured home for your children. When you get divorced, it's not your children's job to suddenly take on more chores, to suddenly take on helping you more, or help raise the younger children more. That's not their job. A child's job is to be a child and learn and grow. And if you put that child into that position, that child's not mentally and emotionally ready for that. They don't know what to do. Like, one day I'm playing and being a kid. It's great. I'm having fun. The next day, oh, shoot. You want me to do what? I'm like surrogate mom now. I got to feed and get them bottles and change diapers. I got to make snack. I got to let them in or go pick them up, or you put a child in this position that an adult is supposed to be in. And the child does not know how to be an adult because they're not an adult. So they just have to do the best they can, and this is causing them stress, anxiety, low self-esteem, because they feel like a failure because they're trying to do things that they should not be trying to do. So you're setting your child up for failure in life because they're never going to feel good enough because they were put in a position to be an adult when they were not an adult. According to an analysis of 63 studies, children living with divorced mothers do better when the father pays child support, which may be a barometer of the tie between the father and the child, and also of relative lack of rancor between the ex-spouses. Now, I believe that the separate parent who has moved out should provide child support so that the children have clothes to wear, food to eat. I've told you the story about, my son, the shoe he was wearing fell apart. And it fell apart the weekend before, and the ex had glued it back together. Well, then it fell apart at school, and the school calls me and says, hey, this is unacceptable. We were told it fell apart before, you glued it back together, and, you need to get this child a new pair of shoes, or we're going to contact, CPS, because a child in the winter especially has to have it. So needless to say, I'm on the phone with the ex saying, why did you do this? Here's the school called me. I didn't know this had happened. No one told me this had happened. You go take this child to the store and get him a new pair of shoes tonight, or, there's going to be some consequences. My ex did not want to pay child support. So in lieu of giving me money, because it just chafed his hide so bad to have to give me cash, he paid the bills on the house to the tune of what child support would cost. And I was fine with that. I was like, I don't care. Fine. Pay the bills. Because, he's just being so petty. His little pride was hurt. It's a shame. Men and their pride. Oh my gosh. Frequency of contact with the father is not as important as the quality of the father-child relationship. So there needs to be a quality relationship. That's one of the things. That's why my divorce took 2 years to get through. I did not feel like the father of my children deserved to have a visitation because he was being abusive. But according to the court, because he's the father of boys, and so many fathers don't want to be involved in their child's life, and it was hearsay that these things occurred because we didn't have, evidence that could be, brought out into court. He decided that, yes, the ex could have them every weekend. I would have them through the week, to help them with school and regular life. But he would get to play with them basically on the weekend because he was a big kid and he got to play with his kids, all the boys hanging out together playing on the weekend. So sometimes the courts don't always get it right, in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. Children who are close to their non-resident fathers and whose fathers use authoritative parenting tend to do better in school. And that's because, the father's also teaching the child, setting up rules for the child. Like I said, authoritative parenting, that's the way to go. Authoritarian, too far the other way. Permissive, too far the other way. Authoritative. Teach the child the difference between right and wrong, why it's right and wrong. Teaching is all you need to be doing with this kid forever. Every moment's a teaching moment. Children who do not enjoy such relationships with their fathers are likely to have behavior problems. And that's because children learn what they live. If dad don't behave right, they're probably not going to behave right either. Children also perform better academically if their non-resident fathers are involved in their schools. Excuse me. And that's because if the father feels like school's important, they're more likely to think it is too. And if their custodial mothers use effective parenting practices and provide skill-building activities at home. And again, like I said, every moment's teaching moment, you need to provide skill-building activities. Don't do everything for them because they're going to grow up, helpless, learn helplessness. And don't, make it harder on them so that you set them up for failure. So then they have low self-esteem, like I can't do anything, I'm not good enough. And that's where I'm going to leave you today. I hope this helped you figure out maybe a little bit more about why you do what you do. Until next time.